The year is 1328. China lies fractured under Mongol rule, its people starving, its ancient systems collapsing. In a small village in Anhui province, a boy named Zhu Yuanzhang watches his entire family die from famine and plague within a single week. He has no money for coffins, no land to bury them. At 16 years old, he becomes a wandering Buddhist monk, simply to survive. This boy will become the Hongwu Emperor, founder of the Ming Dynasty, the man who will drive the Mongols from China and establish an empire that lasts nearly 3 centuries. His story begins in the most desperate circumstances imaginable. The Mongol Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan in 1271, had brought China under foreign rule for the first time in its history. For the first few decades, the Yuan system functioned adequately. Trade flourished along the Silk Road. Cultural exchange accelerated. But by the 1340s, everything was breaking down. The Yellow River flooded catastrophically in 1344, destroying thousands of villages and killing hundreds of thousands. The government's response was incompetent and corrupt. Relief supplies never reached the victims. Taxes continued to be collected from people who had lost everything. When the river changed its course entirely, displacing millions more, the dynasty simply had no capacity to respond. Famine followed flood. Then came the plague, possibly an early wave of the Black Death that was devastating Europe at the same time. Within 5 years, China's population dropped by perhaps 30%. Some regions lost half their people. Into this chaos stepped various rebel movements. Some were explicitly anti-Mongol, calling for the restoration of Chinese rule. Others were millenarian religious movements promising cosmic transformation. The White Lotus Society combined Buddhism, Manichaeism, and folk religion into a revolutionary ideology that attracted desperate peasants by the thousands. The young Zhu Yuanzhang, now calling himself Zhu Yuanzhang, joined one of these rebel groups in 1352. He was 24 years old and had spent 8 years as a monk. He possessed no military training, no education, no resources. What he had was extraordinary intelligence, ruthless pragmatism, and a survival instinct honed by years of desperate poverty. Within 3 years, he commanded his own independent force. He showed immediate talent for military strategy and, more importantly, for administration. While other rebel leaders simply plundered the territories they captured, Zhu established functioning governments. He recruited educated advisors, implemented fair taxation, punished soldiers who abused civilians. Areas under his control became islands of order in a sea of chaos. This was calculated survival strategy. Zhu understood that peasant rebellions usually failed because they couldn't transition from destruction to governance. He was building something sustainable from the beginning, creating the administrative foundation for what would become an empire. By 1356, Zhu Yuanzhang controlled Nanjing, one of China's most important cities. This was the turning point. Nanjing gave him legitimacy, resources, and a strategic base in the wealthy Yangtze River Valley. He was no longer just another rebel warlord. He was a serious contender for power. The competition was intense. China had fragmented into multiple rival kingdoms, each led by rebel commanders who had carved out their own territories. The Mongol Yuan court still controlled the north, though its power was diminishing rapidly. The real struggle was between Chinese rebel factions fighting each other for supremacy. Zhu's main rivals were formidable. Chen Yuliang controlled a vast territory in the middle Yangtze and commanded over 300,000 men. Zhang Xicheng held the wealthy lower Yangtze region, including Suzhou and the prosperous coastal areas. Both were powerful. Both had more resources than Zhu initially possessed. The decisive confrontation came in 1363 at the Battle of Lake Poyang, the largest naval battle in history up to that point. Chen Yuliang attacked with a fleet that included massive warships, some reportedly carrying over 1,000 men each. His fleet numbered 650,000 men, according to Ming sources, though modern historians consider this exaggerated. Still, he significantly outnumbered Zhu's forces. Zhu won through superior tactics and technology. His smaller, more maneuverable ships used fire attacks to devastating effect. The massive enemy vessels became floating infernos, unable to escape the shallow lake waters. Chen himself was killed by an arrow. His fleet was annihilated. In a single battle, Zhu eliminated his most dangerous rival. Zhang Xicheng fell next, defeated in a methodical campaign that lasted several years. Zhu's approach was systematic. Isolate enemy strongholds, cut supply lines, wait for surrender. He avoided wasteful frontal assaults, preferring siege warfare and patience. By 1367, Zhang was captured and executed. The Mongol Yuan court, watching from Beijing, had failed to intervene effectively in these southern conflicts. Internal divisions paralyzed the government. Different Mongol factions fought each other for control. Chinese advisors were ignored. The military had deteriorated from decades of peace and corruption. When Zhu finally turned north in 1368, the Yuan dynasty collapsed with remarkable speed. His general Xu Da captured Beijing in September 1368. The Mongol Emperor Tohon Temur fled north to Mongolia. For the first time in nearly a century, China was ruled by Chinese again. Zhu declared himself emperor in January 1368, taking the reign name Hongwu, meaning vastly martial. He established his capital at Nanjing. The Ming Dynasty had begun. The Mongol emperor's flight didn't end the conflict. Yuan loyalists controlled much of the northern frontier and continued military operations for years. Mongol cavalry remained the finest in the world. They could raid deep into Chinese territory, then vanish into the steppes before Ming armies could respond. Hongwu understood that defeating the Mongols militarily wasn't enough. He needed to prevent their return, to create a defensive system that could contain the steppe threat permanently. This strategic challenge would define Ming military policy for the next 2 centuries and lead directly to the greatest construction project in human history. But first, he had to secure his new dynasty internally. Hongwu faced enormous challenges. The country was devastated. Agricultural production had collapsed. Trade networks were disrupted. Government institutions barely functioned. The population had declined dramatically. Entire regions were depopulated. His response was systematic reconstruction on a massive scale. He ordered a complete cadastral survey, measuring every field, recording every household. Tax rates were standardized and reduced to encourage agricultural recovery. Abandoned land was distributed to landless peasants. Farmers who brought wasteland under cultivation received tax exemptions. The results were dramatic. Within 20 years, agricultural production had recovered to pre-crisis levels. The population began increasing again. Tax revenues grew, providing resources for further reconstruction and military operations. Hongwu also rebuilt the entire government system from the ground up. He abolished the traditional position of prime minister, concentrating power in the emperor's hands. 6 ministries reported directly to him: personnel, revenue, rights, war, justice, and works. This created an administrative structure that would function for nearly 3 centuries. The legal system was overhauled. A new law code, the Great Ming Code, was promulgated in 1397. It established clear legal procedures, standardized punishments, and protected certain basic rights. While harsh by modern standards, it represented a significant advance in legal rationality. Education was revolutionized. The imperial examination system, which had atrophied under Mongol rule, was restored and expanded. Examinations were held regularly at county, provincial, and national levels. Success brought government appointments regardless of family background. This created a meritocratic path to power that attracted talented people from across society. Hongwu was a paranoid ruler, and his paranoia increased with age. He had risen from absolute poverty to supreme power. Through ruthless competition, he trusted no one. He saw conspiracies everywhere. His response was brutal. He conducted multiple purges of the government, executing tens of thousands of officials on charges of corruption or treason. The worst was the Hu Weiyong affair of 1380. Hu, his prime minister, was accused of plotting rebellion. He was executed, along with his entire family. Then the purge expanded. Anyone connected to Hu, however tangentially, was investigated. Over 30,000 people were eventually executed. Another massive purge followed in 1393, the case of the Blue Covers, named after the blue-covered books allegedly used to record the conspiracy. Another 15,000 died. The exact charges remain unclear. Modern historians suspect there were no real conspiracies, just an emperor eliminating anyone he perceived as a potential threat. These purges terrorized the bureaucracy, but didn't destroy the governmental system Hongwu had created. The institutions were robust enough to survive even his paranoid violence. The 6 ministries continued functioning. The examination system kept producing new officials. The legal code remained in force. Hongwu's family was established as the imperial clan. His sons were made princes and given territories to govern. This created its own problems that would later destabilize the dynasty, but initially it seemed like sensible succession planning. The military was reorganized into the Wei Suo system, a hereditary military household arrangement. Soldiers were granted land and required to maintain military readiness generation after generation. Officers came from military families. This created a permanent, self-sustaining military force without the need for mass conscription or massive government expenditure. By the time Hongwu died in 1398, he had transformed China from a war-torn, fragmented disaster into a unified, functioning empire. Agricultural production was at record levels. The population was growing. Government revenues exceeded expenses. The military had expanded and was well equipped. But he had also created problems. The succession arrangements were unstable. He had designated his grandson Zhu Yuanzhang as heir, passing over his powerful sons. This led immediately to civil war. His son Zhu Di, the Prince of Yuan, rebelled in 1399, claiming the throne through military force. The Jingnan campaign lasted 4 years and devastated large parts of northern China. Zhu Di won, becoming the Yongle Emperor in 1402. His reign would mark the Ming Dynasty's peak of power and prestige. Yongle was different from his father. Hongwu had been defensive, focused on consolidating China proper. Yongle was expansionist, ambitious, determined to project Ming power across Asia and beyond. His first priority was eliminating the Mongol threat permanently. He launched 5 massive military campaigns into Mongolia between 1410 and 1424. These weren't defensive operations. They were offensive expeditions deep into the steppes, aimed at destroying Mongol power at its source. The logistics were staggering. The 1410 campaign involved over 250,000 troops, plus support personnel, moving hundreds of miles beyond the Great Wall. Supply lines stretched across deserts and grasslands. Portable granaries were established at strategic points. Thousands of carts transported food, weapons, and equipment. The campaigns were partially successful. Mongol forces were repeatedly defeated in direct combat. Their camps were destroyed, livestock was captured. But the fundamental problem remained. The Mongols could simply retreat deeper into the steppes, beyond Ming reach, then return after the Chinese armies withdrew. Yongle realized military campaigns alone wouldn't solve the problem. He needed a permanent defensive system. This led to the decision that would define the Ming Dynasty's legacy, the reconstruction of the Great Wall on an unprecedented scale. But expansion wasn't limited to the north. Yongle also turned south and west. Annam, northern Vietnam, was conquered in 1407 and incorporated into the empire as a province. This proved temporary. Vietnamese resistance was too strong, and the province was abandoned in 1427. But it demonstrated Ming military reach. In the west, Ming authority was extended into Yunnan and across the southwestern frontiers. Tibet was brought under loose Chinese suzerainty through diplomatic missions and the conferring of titles on Buddhist leaders. The goal was creating a buffer zone, protecting China's western approaches. The Great Wall as we know it today is primarily a Ming creation. Earlier dynasties had built various walls and fortifications along the northern frontier. The Qin dynasty connected these into a unified system in the 3rd century BCE. But that ancient wall was mostly rammed earth and had largely eroded by Ming times. The Ming Wall was different. It was built to last. Most of it was faced with brick and stone. Watchtowers were placed every few hundred meters. Garrison fortresses held thousands of troops. Signal beacon networks allowed messages to travel hundreds of miles in hours. Construction began in earnest during Yongle's reign and continued for over 2 centuries. The scale was extraordinary. The main wall stretched over 5,500 miles from the coast to the western deserts. Branch walls, loops, and subsidiary defenses added thousands of miles more. Building it required mobilizing enormous resources. Millions of workers labored on the wall over multiple generations. Soldiers, peasants, and prisoners all contributed labor. Bricks were manufactured in massive kilns built specifically for wall construction. Stone was quarried from nearby mountains. Timber for watchtowers and gates was transported hundreds of miles. The organization required was staggering. Regional military commanders supervised construction in their sectors, but coordination came from Beijing. Standards were established for wall dimensions, watchtower spacing, and construction materials. Inspectors traveled along the wall verifying that specifications were met. Poor construction could result in severe punishment for responsible officials. The labor system varied by region and period. In some areas, soldiers from the Weizhou garrison system provided most labor, working on the wall during times when military threats were minimal. This made strategic sense. The troops who would defend the wall built it themselves, giving them intimate knowledge of its features and capabilities. In other regions, corvée labor was conscripted from the peasant population. Men were required to work for specified periods, typically during agricultural off-seasons. The burden could be severe, pulling farmers away from their land and families. Some sources suggest that 1 in every 10 adult males in northern provinces spent time working on the wall at some point. Prisoners represented another labor source. Convicted criminals were sentenced to wall construction as punishment. The work was brutal. Exposure to harsh weather, physical exhaustion, inadequate food, dangerous conditions. Mortality rates among prisoner laborers were reportedly high, though exact figures are impossible to determine. The logistics of supplying workers with food, tools, and materials across thousands of miles of difficult terrain tested the dynasty's administrative capacity. Supply routes were established, often following the wall itself. Grain was transported from agricultural regions to support workers in barren frontier areas. Tools had to be manufactured and distributed. Construction materials required constant replenishment. Brick production alone was a massive industrial undertaking. Kilns were built along the wall's length, taking advantage of local clay deposits. Each brick was stamped with information identifying when it was made, who supervised production, and which unit was responsible. This accountability system helped maintain quality standards and allowed officials to trace defects back to responsible parties. The bricks themselves varied in size and composition, depending on local materials and construction requirements. Standard wall bricks were roughly 15 inches long, 7 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. Millions were needed. Some estimates suggest that sections of the wall near Beijing contain over 100 million bricks. Stone quarrying presented different challenges. Suitable stone had to be located, extracted, shaped, and transported to construction sites. In mountainous regions, this was relatively straightforward. Quarries could be opened near the wall route. In flatter areas, stone had to be hauled considerable distances, sometimes requiring the construction of temporary roads to move massive blocks. The construction process itself varied depending on terrain and strategic requirements. In mountainous regions, the wall often followed ridgelines, taking advantage of natural defensive features. Construction crews would first level the ridgetop, creating a stable foundation. Then they would build up the wall structure, facing it with brick or stone, and filling the interior with rammed earth, rubble, and whatever materials were locally available. In flatter terrain, the wall was typically built up from ground level, requiring more extensive foundations. Some sections were constructed with deep stone foundations to prevent undermining. Others relied on sheer mass, walls 15 to 20 feet thick at the base, tapering to perhaps 12 feet at the top. Watchtowers were placed at regular intervals, typically every few hundred meters, positioned to maintain visual contact with neighboring towers. These weren't simple platforms. Many were substantial structures, 2 or 3 stories tall, with garrison quarters, storage rooms, and defensive positions. Larger towers could hold 30 to 50 soldiers and contained supplies sufficient for weeks or months. The towers served multiple purposes beyond simple observation. They were defensive strongpoints that could hold out even if wall sections were breached. They stored weapons, ammunition, and supplies. They housed the signal beacon system that allowed rapid communication along the wall's length. The beacon system was remarkably sophisticated. Each tower maintained fires that could be lit to signal enemy approach. The number and pattern of fires conveyed information about threat size and type. In ideal conditions, A signal could travel from the eastern coast to Beijing, over 400 miles, in a matter of hours. This gave commanders time to concentrate forces against threats before they could penetrate deeply into Chinese territory. Major fortresses anchored the defensive system at strategic points. Jiayuguan, at the western end of the wall, was more than just a gate. It was a complex military installation with multiple defensive walls, garrison buildings, temples, and administrative offices. Over 1,000 troops were permanently stationed there, controlling the narrow pass between mountains and desert. Shanhaiguan, where the wall meets the sea in the east, was similarly impressive. The fortress town controlled the coastal route between Manchuria and northern China. Its walls were over 30 feet high, faced with brick, and reinforced with massive gates that could be sealed against attack. Tens of thousands of troops were garrisoned in the surrounding area. The financial cost was immense. At peak construction periods, wall building consumed perhaps 10% of total government revenue. This was sustainable only because the Ming economy was so productive and government administration so efficient. But the burden was real and contributed to fiscal pressures that plagued the dynasty. Regional economies were affected in complex ways. Areas near the wall saw development as military garrisons created markets for food, goods, and services. Towns grew up around major fortresses, benefiting from military spending. But the same regions bore the heaviest labor burdens and faced the greatest risk from Mongol raids. The human cost is harder to quantify, but was certainly substantial. The traditional claim that millions died building the wall is likely exaggerated. Death rates that high would have made construction logistically impossible. But thousands certainly died from accidents, exposure, disease, and exhaustion. Families were disrupted. Agricultural production suffered when men were pulled away for construction duty. Despite these costs, the wall was more than a physical barrier. It was a statement of strategic intent. China would defend its borders but not seek to conquer the steppes. This represented a fundamental shift from earlier Chinese dynasties that had attempted to control Mongolia directly. The wall system worked mostly. It didn't stop all raids, but it channeled Mongol movements into predictable routes where Ming forces could concentrate. Watchtowers provided early warning. Garrison troops could respond quickly to incursions. The combination of static defenses and mobile forces created an effective defensive system. But the wall also reflected the Ming dynasty's increasingly defensive mindset. While Yongle was building the wall, he was also launching the greatest maritime expeditions in history, projecting Chinese power across the Indian Ocean. This contradiction, simultaneous expansion and retrenchment, characterized Ming's strategic culture. The wall became a symbol. For Chinese, it represented security and civilization's boundary. For outsiders, it represented China's power and determination to remain separate. Modern nationalist narratives have transformed it into a symbol of Chinese resilience and ingenuity, though this simplifies a much more complex historical reality. Ironically, the wall ultimately failed to protect the dynasty. When the Ming collapsed in 1644, the Manchus didn't breach the wall through military assault. A Ming general, Wu Sangui, opened the gates at Shanhaiguan and invited the Manchus through, hoping they would help suppress the rebel forces that had just captured Beijing. The most expensive defensive system in history was rendered irrelevant by political collapse and internal betrayal. Yet the wall endures. Sections near Beijing have been extensively restored and attract millions of tourists annually. More remote sections remain in various states of preservation, crumbling slowly across mountains and deserts. It stands as the Ming dynasty's most visible legacy, a monument to imperial ambition, engineering capability, and the belief that security could be achieved through massive construction and eternal vigilance. The peasant laborers who built it, the soldiers who defended it, and the officials who planned it are long forgotten. But their creation remains, testament to what human organization and effort can accomplish, and to the ultimate limits of any defensive system when the society it protects decays from within. While armies marched north to fight Mongols and millions labored on the Great Wall, the Ming dynasty was simultaneously launching the greatest maritime expeditions in history. Between 1405 and 1433, the Admiral Zhang commanded 7 massive voyages across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as the east coast of Africa. These weren't exploration missions in the European sense. They were demonstrations of power, diplomatic expeditions designed to bring foreign kingdoms into China's tributary system and showcase Ming wealth and technological superiority. The scale was unprecedented. The first voyage in 1405 involved over 200 ships and 27,000 men. The largest vessels, the treasure ships, were enormous by contemporary standards, possibly over 400 feet long, though exact dimensions remain disputed. Even conservative estimates make them far larger than anything Europeans would build for another century. The fleets carried trade goods, diplomatic gifts, and troops. They visited dozens of ports throughout Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and East Africa. Everywhere they went, they distributed gifts, established diplomatic relations, and impressed local rulers with Chinese power. Zhang himself was a fascinating figure. He was a Muslim eunuch from Yunnan, captured as a boy during Ming conquest of the region, castrated and brought into imperial service. He rose through military merit and Yongle's personal favor to command these unprecedented expeditions. The voyages brought exotic goods back to China, giraffes from Africa, precious stones from Ceylon, spices from India, tribute from dozens of kingdoms. They established Chinese trading posts and communities throughout the Indian Ocean world. Chinese merchants followed the official fleets, creating commercial networks that would last for centuries. But the voyages also revealed a fundamental Chinese attitude toward foreign trade and expansion. Unlike European voyages a century later, the Ming expeditions weren't colonizing missions. They didn't seize territory or establish permanent overseas possessions. The goal was diplomatic prestige and the incorporation of foreign kingdoms into China's hierarchical worldview, not territorial conquest or commercial exploitation. This limited their long-term impact. When the voyages ended in 1433, China's maritime capabilities didn't disappear, but the government stopped sponsoring such expeditions. Resources were redirected to land defenses and internal administration. The decision wasn't inevitable, but it reflected the Ming court's priorities. Defense against land-based threats took precedence over maritime expansion. The Ming Dynasty oversaw an economic transformation that made China the world's richest country and largest economy. Agricultural productivity reached levels that wouldn't be matched anywhere else for centuries. Manufacturing output was enormous. Trade networks spanned Eurasia. The foundation was agricultural. The Ming government's early land reforms had created a class of small-holding peasants with secure tenure and reasonable tax burdens. These farmers responded by intensifying cultivation, adopting new crops, and improving techniques. New crop varieties were introduced from abroad. American crops, maize, sweet potatoes, peanuts, tobacco, arrived via trade networks and proved extraordinarily productive. They could grow on marginal land unsuitable for rice or wheat, effectively expanding China's agricultural base. Multiple cropping became standard in southern China, 2 rice harvests per year, sometimes 3 in favorable conditions. Intercropping techniques maximized land use. Fish were raised in rice paddies, creating integrated agricultural systems of remarkable efficiency. The result was a population explosion. China's population in 1400 was perhaps 65 million, still recovering from the 14th century disasters. By 1600, it exceeded 150 million. By 1650, it might have reached 200 million. No other society had ever sustained such numbers. Manufacturing expanded proportionally. Textile production, particularly cotton and silk, reached industrial scales. Jingdezhen became the world's porcelain capital, its kilns producing millions of pieces annually for domestic and export markets. Iron production was enormous, possibly 150,000 tons per year by 1600, comparable to all of Europe combined. Trade networks connected China to the world economy. Chinese silk and porcelain were luxury goods throughout Eurasia. Silver flowed into China from Japanese mines and later from Spanish America via Manila. This silver influx monetized the economy, replacing copper cash and paper money with silver-based transactions. Cities grew explosively. Beijing, rebuilt as the capital under Yongle, became one of the world's largest cities with over 600,000 people. Nanjing was even larger, possibly exceeding 1 million. Dozens of other cities had populations over 100,000. Urban culture flourished. Publishing expanded dramatically as woodblock printing became cheaper and literacy spread. Novels, plays, and philosophical works circulated widely. A commercial entertainment culture emerged, with theaters, restaurants, and pleasure quarters catering to urban consumers. But this economic success created problems. Growing commercialization undermined traditional social structures. Merchants became wealthy but remained politically powerless, creating tensions. The massive silver imports eventually caused inflation and economic instability. Regional inequality increased, with coastal regions far wealthier than interior areas. The Ming Dynasty presided over one of Chinese history's great cultural flowerings. Art, literature, philosophy, and science all reached new heights. This wasn't accidental. It resulted from deliberate government policies, economic prosperity, and the examination system's cultural effects. The examination system shaped elite culture profoundly. Success required mastering classical texts, composing poetry, and writing essays in highly formal styles. This created a shared cultural vocabulary among the educated class and encouraged artistic and literary production. Every 3 years, hundreds of thousands of candidates sat for examinations at the county level. Those who passed advanced to provincial examinations. The tiny fraction who succeeded there could attempt the palace examination in Beijing, presided over by the emperor himself. The entire process could take decades. Men regularly sat for examinations into their 40s or 50s, studying constantly, memorizing vast quantities of classical literature. This system created a massive educated class, far larger than the government could possibly employ. Thousands of degree holders never received appointments. They became teachers, private secretaries, estate managers, local leaders. This surplus of educated men created an enormous market for cultural production. They needed books to study, art to display their refinement, entertainment to occupy their leisure. Publishing exploded. Woodblock printing technology had existed for centuries, but Ming commercial publishers transformed it into a genuine industry. Books that once existed in dozens of hand-copied manuscripts were now printed in thousands of copies. Prices fell dramatically. A book that might have cost several months' wages in the Song dynasty could be purchased for a few days' wages by the late Ming. The content diversified enormously. Classical texts remained central, but publishers also produced practical manuals on agriculture, medicine, commerce, and technology. Encyclopedias compiled knowledge from multiple fields. Local gazetteers documented every county's geography, history, notable figures, and customs. Fiction and drama, once dismissed as vulgar entertainment, began appearing in printed editions that sold widely. This democratization of knowledge had profound effects. Ideas that once circulated only among tiny elites now reached tens of thousands of readers. Regional cultures could document themselves and assert their importance. Merchants and artisans gained access to knowledge previously monopolized by the educated class. Painting reached new levels of sophistication. The Wu school, centered in Suzhou, produced works of extraordinary refinement, combining technical mastery with philosophical depth. Artists like Shen Zhou and Wen Zhengming created landscapes that were simultaneously realistic representations and symbolic expressions of Confucian values. Shen Zhou, born in 1427 to a wealthy Suzhou family, never sat for the imperial examinations despite his obvious talent. He chose instead to focus entirely on painting and poetry, supported by family wealth. His landscape paintings combined meticulous observation of nature with literary allusions and philosophical meaning. A painting of a mountain wasn't just a mountain. It referenced classical poetry, embodied Confucian principles of moral uprightness, and demonstrated the painter's cultural refinement through brushwork style and compositional choices. Wen Zhengming, Shen Zhou's student, did attempt the examinations but failed repeatedly. He eventually received an official appointment through recommendation, served briefly, then resigned to devote himself to art. His paintings were more deliberate and controlled than Shen's, displaying absolute technical mastery. He painted into his 80s, producing works of astonishing precision and refinement. The Wu school wasn't the only important painting movement. The Zhe school, centered in the imperial court, practiced a more dramatic style with bold brushwork and striking compositions. Dai Jin, its founder, created powerful images that emphasized immediate visual impact over literary subtlety. These stylistic differences reflected deeper cultural divisions. The Wu school represented literati values, refinement, restraint, classical learning expressed through art. The Zhe school represented professional painting, technical virtuosity, dramatic effect, painting as skilled craft rather than philosophical expression. Women painters emerged in unprecedented numbers. Traditional restrictions on women's activities meant they rarely received formal training or public recognition. But Ming prosperity and urbanization created spaces where talented women could develop artistic skills. Wen Shu, daughter of Wen Zhongming, was an accomplished painter. Ma Shuzhen, a courtesan in Nanjing, became famous for her paintings of orchids and bamboo. Xue Susu painted landscapes that rivaled the best male artists' work. Their achievements were remarkable, given the constraints they faced. Women couldn't sit for examinations, couldn't hold office, couldn't travel freely. Art offered one of the few acceptable outlets for female talent and ambition. That so many women produced significant work despite these limitations speaks to both their ability and the cultural space the Ming period created. Literature flourished in multiple genres. The novel emerged as a serious art form. 4 works in particular achieved lasting fame and continue shaping Chinese culture today. Journey to the West, attributed to Wu Cheng-en, tells the story of the Buddhist monk Xuanzang's 7th century journey to India, accompanied by supernatural disciples, including the famous Monkey King, Sun Wukong. On one level, it's a picaresque adventure filled with demons, magic, and comedy. On another, it's a complex religious allegory about spiritual cultivation and enlightenment. The Monkey King became one of Chinese culture's most enduring characters, representing rebellion, cleverness, and irreverence. Water Margin, attributed to Shi Nian, recounts the adventures of 108 outlaws during the Song dynasty. The heroes are bandits and rebels, yet the novel portrays them as righteous men driven to outlawry by corrupt officials and unjust society. It celebrates martial virtue, loyalty, and resistance to tyranny. The work had enormous political influence, inspiring numerous actual rebellions by people who identified with its outlaw heroes. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, compiled by Luo Guanzhong from earlier storytelling traditions, dramatizes the wars between rival kingdoms following the Han Dynasty's collapse in the 3rd century. It's simultaneously a thrilling war epic and a sophisticated exploration of political strategy, leadership, and moral ambiguity. Generations of Chinese readers have studied it for insights into politics and human nature. Jinping Mei, or The Plum in the Golden Vase, is fundamentally different. It's an explicitly sexual novel, set in contemporary Ming society, depicting the decadent household of a wealthy merchant. Banned repeatedly for obscenity, it's also a devastating social critique, exposing the corruption, hypocrisy, and exploitation beneath Ming prosperity's glossy surface. Its realistic detail makes it an invaluable historical source on daily life, even as its sexual content shocked conservative readers. These novels created templates that shaped Chinese fiction for centuries. They demonstrated that vernacular Chinese could carry complex narratives and serious themes. They reached audiences far beyond the educated elite, circulating in tea houses and entertainment venues, where storytellers performed them orally. Short fiction also flourished. Collections like Stories to Awaken the World compiled hundreds of tales about merchants, craftsmen, scholars, and courtesans. These stories depicted contemporary urban life with remarkable realism, dealing frankly with money, sex, and social ambition in ways classical literature avoided. Drama developed into sophisticated art. Hongwu opera, with its elaborate staging, musical complexity, and literary refinement, became the preferred entertainment of educated elites. It originated in Kunshan near Suzhou in the mid-16th century and quickly spread to major cities. Hongwu performances were extraordinarily elaborate. A single play could run for multiple days. Costumes were spectacular, often worth more than a prosperous merchant's annual income. Musicians played complex scores requiring years of training to master. Performers studied for decades to achieve the necessary skill in singing, acting, and movement. The plays themselves were literary masterpieces. Tang Xianzu's Peony Pavilion, written in 1598, represents the pinnacle of this tradition. It tells the story of Du Liniang, A sheltered young woman who dreams of a scholar, falls in love with his dream image, dies of lovesickness, then returns from the underworld where the real scholar discovers her portrait and falls in love with her ghost. The plot is fantastical, but Tang uses it to explore profound questions about desire, identity, social convention, and the boundaries between life and death. The language is exquisitely beautiful, dense with literary allusion and poetic imagery. The emotional impact was powerful. Reportedly, several women died of emotion while watching performances, so moved they couldn't bear the intensity. Tang Xianzu was himself a frustrated official. He had passed the examinations and held various posts, but his criticism of court corruption led to demotion and eventual retirement. He poured his political frustration and philosophical questions into his plays, creating works that transcended entertainment to become serious literature. Opera wasn't limited to elites. Regional opera forms served broader audiences with less refined language and more action-oriented plots. These popular operas depicted heroes and villains in stark terms, celebrated martial valor and filial piety, and provided moral instruction alongside entertainment. Philosophy saw vigorous debate. Wang Yangming, born in 1472, developed an influential Neo-Confucian philosophy that challenged orthodox interpretations and inspired passionate followers and equally passionate critics. Wang's central insight was that moral knowledge is innate. Every person possesses an intuitive understanding of right and wrong, what he called the fundamental goodness of the mind. Moral cultivation isn't about learning external rules, but about removing the selfish desires and false knowledge that obscure our innate moral sense. This had radical implications. If moral knowledge is innate, then ordinary people can achieve sagehood without extensive classical education. A peasant or merchant who acts on their innate moral sense is more virtuous than a scholar who has memorized classics but acts immorally. This challenged the examination system's assumption that classical learning produces moral superiority. Wang also emphasized the unity of knowledge and action. True knowledge must be expressed in behavior. Knowing something intellectually but failing to act accordingly isn't real knowledge at all. This was a direct challenge to scholars who studied ethics while behaving unethically. Wang's ideas spread rapidly, attracting devoted followers but also fierce opposition. Orthodox Confucians accused him of Buddhist influence and dangerous subjectivism. If everyone trusts their own innate moral sense, they argued, how do we maintain social order and shared values? Wang's philosophy could justify rebellion and social chaos. The debate continued throughout the Ming period and beyond. Wang's emphasis on intuition and inner cultivation influenced later thinkers in China, Korea, and Japan. His followers established schools and academies teaching his philosophy. Some took his ideas in radical directions, arguing for even greater social equality and individual autonomy. Li Zhe, born in 1527, pushed Wang's ideas toward genuinely subversive conclusions. He argued that classical texts weren't absolute truth, but reflected their authors' limited perspectives. He defended merchants and profit-seeking, arguing they weren't inherently immoral. He suggested that women deserved education and could achieve moral cultivation equal to men. He questioned whether Confucius himself was infallible. These positions made Li Zhe extremely controversial. He was repeatedly accused of corrupting youth and undermining social order. In 1602, he was arrested on charges of spreading dangerous doctrines. He committed suicide in prison rather than face trial. His books were officially banned, though they continued circulating clandestinely and influenced subsequent thinkers. Science and technology advanced significantly. Li Shizhen's Compendium of Materia Medica, completed in 1578 after nearly 30 years of research, catalogued 1,892 drugs derived from plants, animals, and minerals. For each substance, Li described its properties, medical uses, preparation methods, and potential dangers. He corrected errors in earlier texts, added new drugs, and organized everything systematically. The work represented an extraordinary research effort. Li interviewed physicians, pharmacists, and folk healers across China. He personally tested drugs when possible. He consulted over 800 earlier texts, carefully evaluating their claims. The result was a comprehensive medical reference that remained standard for centuries, and still informs traditional Chinese medicine today. Song Yingxing's Tiangong Kaiwu, The Exploitation of the Works of Nature, published in 1637, documented contemporary technology in unprecedented detail. It covered agriculture, textile production, metallurgy, ceramics, shipbuilding, and numerous other crafts. The text was accompanied by detailed illustrations showing tools, techniques, and processes. Song's purpose was preserving practical knowledge that he feared was being lost as educated elites focused increasingly on literary accomplishment and neglected practical skills. The book documented how things were actually made, how rice was cultivated, how silk was produced, how iron was smelted. It revealed the sophisticated technology underlying Ming prosperity. Zhu Yuanzhang, born in 1562, became one of China's first significant Christian converts and played a crucial role introducing European scientific knowledge to China. He collaborated with the Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci to translate Euclid's Elements into Chinese, making Western mathematics accessible to Chinese scholars. Zhu saw no contradiction between Chinese and Western knowledge. He believed the best approach was combining Chinese traditional learning with Western scientific methods. He promoted Western agricultural techniques, translated works on hydraulics and astronomy, and advocated reforming the Chinese calendar using Western astronomical observations. His own research focused on agriculture. His complete treatise on agricultural administration compiled knowledge from Chinese and Western sources, proposing systematic reforms to increase productivity. He introduced sweet potatoes to northern China, correctly predicting they would help prevent famine. His work represented an openness to foreign knowledge that would later become rare as the dynasty became more defensive and inward-looking. Architecture produced enduring masterpieces. The Forbidden City in Beijing, built under Yongle between 1406 and 1420, remains one of the world's great architectural achievements. Its systematic layout, combining functionality with symbolic meaning, perfectly expressed imperial ideology in physical form. The complex covers 178 acres and contains over 900 buildings with nearly 10,000 rooms. Everything is organized along a north-south axis, with the most important buildings in the center. The emperor's throne room sits at the precise center, representing his position as the link between heaven and earth. The architecture itself carries meaning. Yellow glazed tiles reserved for imperial buildings cover the roofs. The number of figures on roof corners indicates building importance, 9 for the most important buildings, representing the highest Yang number. Staircases, doorways, and courtyards are arranged in patterns based on numerological principles. Construction required enormous resources. Tens of thousands of workers labored for years. Timber came from forests hundreds of miles away, floated down rivers, and hauled overland. Marble was quarried and carved. Bricks were manufactured and glazed. The cost was staggering, contributing to fiscal problems that plagued the entire dynasty. But the result was undeniably magnificent. The Forbidden City demonstrated imperial power more effectively than any military display. Foreign envoys approaching through the massive gates and across the vast courtyards couldn't fail to be impressed by the dynasty's wealth and organizational capacity. Private gardens represented another architectural achievement. Wealthy families in Suzhou, Yangzhou, and other prosperous cities created elaborate gardens that were simultaneously living spaces, artistic compositions, and philosophical statements. The Garden of the Master of the Nets in Suzhou, created in the 12th century but extensively rebuilt during the Ming, exemplifies the form. Rocks, water, plants, and buildings are arranged to create a microcosm of nature. Winding paths offer constantly changing views. Windows frame specific scenes like paintings. Every element carries symbolic meaning. Pine trees represent endurance. Bamboo represents moral integrity. Particular rocks suggest mountains. These gardens were designed for contemplation and cultural activities. Scholars gathered to compose poetry, appreciate art, and discuss philosophy. The garden itself became a subject for artistic representation. Painters depicted its scenes, poets described its moods, calligraphers inscribed its pavilions. Music evolved in both courtly and popular forms. The Imperial Music Bureau maintained ancient ritual music performed at state ceremonies and sacrifices. This music was deliberately archaic, preserving forms supposedly dating back to ancient sage kings. It represented cosmic order and political legitimacy through sound. Popular music was far more dynamic. The qin, a 7-stringed zither, was the preferred instrument of literati. Playing the qin was considered a form of self-cultivation, and enormous literature developed discussing proper technique, appropriate repertoire, and the philosophical meaning of different pieces. Vocal music ranged from elegant art songs to bawdy tavern ballads. The songs that accompanied Kuncho opera were musically sophisticated, requiring trained performers. Street music was simpler but enormously varied, reflecting China's regional diversity. This cultural production wasn't purely aesthetic. It served political and social functions. Art and literature reinforced Confucian values and social hierarchies. The examination system's emphasis on classical learning preserved traditional knowledge while allowing for careful innovation. Cultural patronage demonstrated the dynasty's legitimacy and the emperor's virtue. Wealthy merchants, legally inferior to scholars but often far richer, used cultural patronage to gain social prestige. They commissioned paintings, supported opera troupes, built gardens, and published books. This commercialization of culture made it more accessible but also raised questions about whether culture was being debased by market forces. The late Ming period saw increasing cultural anxiety. Some intellectuals worried that commercial values were corrupting traditional culture. Others argued that cultural production had become too focused on technical virtuosity and lost its moral purpose. Debates about authenticity, tradition, and cultural change intensified as the dynasty's political problems worsened. Yet this anxiety itself produced creative responses. Artists and writers grappled seriously with questions about culture's purpose and their own social role. The best late Ming cultural production combines technical mastery with genuine intellectual engagement, creating works that remain powerful today precisely because they emerged from a moment of cultural crisis and transformation. The Ming dynasty's decline was gradual but ultimately catastrophic. Multiple factors combined: environmental disasters, economic problems, political dysfunction, and military challenges. By the early 17th century, the system was failing. Climate change was a major factor. The Little Ice Age affected global temperatures, but China was particularly hard hit. The period from 1580 to 1644 saw repeated harvest failures, droughts, and floods. Agricultural production declined. Famines became frequent and severe. The government's response was inadequate. Tax revenue fell as agricultural output declined, but expenses continued rising. The military demanded more resources as external threats intensified. Government deficits grew. The court responded by increasing tax pressure, which further impoverished peasants and provoked resistance. Political dysfunction paralyzed the system. Factionalism at court became extreme. Eunuchs gained excessive power, particularly under the Tianqi Emperor, 162-67, when the eunuch Wei Zhongxian essentially controlled the government. Competent officials were purged. Corruption became endemic. The examination system, which had previously supplied talented administrators, was producing officials who were literary scholars but incompetent administrators. The curriculum emphasized mastery of classical texts and composition in archaic styles, not practical governance. Officials excelled at writing elegant essays, but failed at managing actual problems. Economic problems intensified. The influx of foreign silver, which had previously monetized the economy and facilitated trade, suddenly reversed. Japanese silver production declined. Spanish-American silver flows became irregular. This created deflation and commercial crisis. Businesses failed. Unemployment rose. Military challenges mounted on multiple fronts. The Mongols remained a threat in the north. Japanese pirates raided coastal areas. And most seriously, the Manchus, a tribal people from Manchuria, were consolidating power and building a formidable military state on China's northeastern frontier. The final crisis began in 1627 with a massive peasant rebellion in Shaanxi province. A failed harvest, increased taxes, and government incompetence pushed desperate peasants to revolt. The rebellion spread quickly. Within a few years, large parts of northern China were in chaos. The rebel leader Li Zhang emerged from this chaos. A former postal clerk who had lost his job in a government austerity measure, he proved to be a gifted military leader. By 1644, he commanded a massive army and controlled much of northern China. In April 1644, Li's forces approached Beijing. The Ming court fled or prepared to surrender. The Chongzhen Emperor, last of the Ming line, reportedly climbed Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City and hanged himself from a tree. The Ming Dynasty was over.